Any of you ever had to call a psychiatric hotline? Yeah, I know. Well, I've had to do that a number of times. And when you get it, it says, if you're obsessive compulsive, press 1 repeatedly. If you're codependent, ask someone else to press number 2 for you. If you are paranoid, we know who you are and where you are. Simply stay there and we will come to get you. If you are narcissistic, hang up. There's nothing wrong with you, but there's something wrong with everybody else. It's a great thing, the psychiatric hotline. And I want to make a little distinction between what you might have if you dial the psychiatric hotline and hang-ups that I'm talking about today. So, there are people, all of us at one time or another, who need some kind of therapy, some kind of sitting down with someone and talking some things through, maybe a little medication. There are times when I've thought, I think I better get some. And then there are just plain old hang-ups, which most of us have. I had a very good friend who asked me one day why we never had any pets. And some of you know the story. I said, well, why do you want to know? And he said, because, when I look at you, Denny, you're just like full of compassion. You love people. It's all, and you don't like pets. That just doesn't seem right. It's wrong. I said, well, I don't know. I just really, I don't care for them all that much. And he said, well, what kind of pets did you have in your childhood? And I told him about 3 dogs that we had. One was a little black and white pup. I don't remember its name. I was like 5 or 6 years old. We lived in Minnesota. We were driving along the road. We stopped at a stoplight, and this little pup hopped out of the back window of our car and ran away. Never came back. And so we moved after that. We moved to Chicago, not to look for the dog. We just moved to Chicago because my dad was going to seminary. And then we moved to Pennsylvania, but we knew we weren't going to be there very long because he was on internship. And then we moved back to Chicago so he could finish seminary, so we didn't get any pets there. And then we moved to Rockford, Illinois. And now my brother and I were in middle school. And my parents surprised us with a basset hound, floppy-eared, cutest looking thing on the face of the planet. Sam was his name. And so we were thrilled. And after about a month, the dog got hit by a car and killed. Oh my goodness, this was horrible. So my dad, doing, the right thing, took us to the vet and with Sam's body, and we said goodbye and all of that. And about 2 weeks later, an other basset hound showed up at our house. My parents bought it. And it was a replacement basset hound for Saman, but it was female, so they called it Samantha. And about 2 months after that, got hit by a car out in front of our house, and that was it. My friend says, no wonder you have a hang-up about pets. My goodness. All your pets got killed. You have a hang-up because, of course, pets remind you of grief and loss and all of that. Hang-ups. So, hang-ups are emotional roadblocks that get in the way of our freely living our life, And they usually have their beginnings in childhood when something happens that we weren't quite able to comprehend or deal with. And so we kind of shoved them off to the side. We kind of ran away from them. And then when we became adults, we figure out, how to keep those hang-ups off to the side. And we keep running from them in one way or the other, you feel like you can't stand up and have your voice heard. Well, there's probably a story about that, in your childhood somewhere. Or you feel like when you go to the ATM, you just don't want to see what the total is in your account. There's probably a story in childhood about that somewhere. You feel like when somebody says a certain word or insults a certain person or figure, that the rage immediately jumps up out of you and you just want to smack them in the nose, Probably something in childhood. These are all hang-ups. They're not psychiatric disorders. They're things that keep us from kind of freely living our lives. Moses had a hang-up. Right after the text that we read today, after his list, 2 excuses that he gives for not being able to do what God wants him to do, not only does he not know what to call this God, and not only does he not have any certainty that he's actually going to be successful at what God is asking him to do, he also says, well, God, I can't possibly do this because I have a heavy tongue. I'm slow of speech. Maybe he's got a stutter. I don't know. But there's some kind of something that he has. It's a hang-up of something, and you can be sure that there's a story behind it. And I would think that story is something we all know. You remember when Moses was an infant, they were going to kill all the babies, the Hebrew babies in Egypt of his under 2 years old. And so his mother floated him down the stream, and the princes of Egypt picks him up and loves this little kid and actually hires the mother to nurse him until he grows to be old enough to, and then he's brought up in the palace as the son of a princess. So he's got a problem, right? He's got a problem because on the one hand, he is the son, the literal son of an oppressed slave. And on the other hand, he's raised as the royal son of a princess in Pharaoh's court. That's a problem. Who am I? How do I know what identity I'm supposed to have here? I have the comfort of royalty and I have the rage of a slave. You see the struggle? So this rage pops out of him one day, and he kills an Egyptian overseer who is messing with a slave. Maybe he didn't have the words. Maybe he resorted to violence because he couldn't get the words out of his mouth quickly enough to be able to say what he wanted to say. But he has this hang-up. And at this point, the hang-up makes him run. And he runs, even though he's the son of this princess, and my goodness, if anybody's going to be safe, he'd be safe, but he so fears that he runs off into the wilderness, creates a whole new life, becomes a shepherd. You don't have to talk real fast to talk to sheep. And he has a family, etc., etc. And then we get to our text today. And the writer gives us this big tip-off. The writer says that he goes beyond the wilderness to Horeb, the Mount of God. Well, when the writer says he goes beyond the wilderness, what do you mean he goes beyond the wilderness? It's all wilderness. I mean, there's a big flag that he's waving saying, religious experience of holiness coming up. Get ready. Put your seatbelts on. Something's going to happen. So you have to pay attention to these little things. And there it is. He goes into the beyond the wilderness. And he has this religious experience, this experience of holiness, this experience of God's presence where the bush is burning but is not consumed. Hang-ups, holiness, that's the second part of the sermon title, just in case you missed it there in the bulletin. I like alliteration, so you get H's today. Hang-ups and holiness. So what the heck is an experience of holiness? Holy has its roots in a word that means unimpaired or inviolate, meaning you can't break it. It is just one whole. You can't break it. It is different than our everyday lives, because in our everyday lives we of course see all kinds of things that can be broken, and consequently we see ourselves most often as in a broken world, separate from other people and other things. But an experience of holiness brings you into this sense of the whole, W-H-O-L-E, that is God's presence, that is God's creation. And when you come into that presence, a few things happen. One is that you realize that you are, in fact, not separate from those others that you thought you were separate from. God says to Moses, my people, I hear their cries, the slaves in Egypt. By the way, they are your people too. So he sees that he is not separate from them. And the second thing that happens is that our hang-ups diminish. In other words, the war that is going on inside of him is encompassed by the wholeness of God. So that his hang-up really becomes, it doesn't disappear, but it becomes much less important. Holiness, religious experience. Bushes are burning all over the place. We just have to keep our eyes open. Bushes are burning in your life, in your neighborhood, at your work. The whole place is burning down. Except it's not burning down because they're not consumed. But our everyday life and the way that we perceive things keeps them separate from us. You know, a lot of us, we have these kinds of experiences. There's the whole nature movement, which is brilliant and wonderful, and you see a sunset, and the whole beauty that you are just taken breathless by, or these remarkable trees here in New England, which we're just, 6 weeks away from them, just being this bright orange and red and yellow, and you get up in the morning and you drive and you can't believe how remarkable this is. How can we possibly live in such beauty? And this beauty, unless, of course, we're living in our everyday life and we're going, I'm going to have to rake those babies up, aren't I? That's not going to be much fun. Well, of course, you can go there as well. But the point is, they're burning down. So there is that. There is beauty in nature, which is something that tells us about the presence of God, and we're often caught up by it. Stop the car, look, let it fill you, let it fill the whole front seat and back seat of your car and your trunk and everything else. Or it might be like my friend Tim, who was walking down Michigan Avenue in Chicago. It's where all the hoity-toity shops are. And he was a regular visitor there. And there are several homeless people on Michigan Avenue. They're begging and doing other things. And he tries to avoid them most of the time, but at this particular moment, he turned and he looked at this homeless man who was sitting on the ground and had a little cloth spread out in front of him for people to put money on. And he just looked at him kind of out of the corner of the eye, but happenstance, the man turned up and looked at him at the same time. And he had no teeth, and he was unshaven, and he had this kind of toothless grin. And as his eyes locked with Tim's eyes, that look on his face connected some synapses in Tim's head. And he remembered a camping trip that he went on with his grandpa, his dad, and his brother in his own childhood many years ago. And he remembered that this was going to be a wonderful trip between them and how much fun they had. And that one morning, he got up, Tim, while his brother and his dad were still sleeping in the tent. And he went out to the fire, and there, with his back to him, was his grandpa, who was cooking breakfast on the fire. Now, Tim's grandpa and his dad had agreed they were not going to shave for this entire camping trip. And as Tim stepped out, his grandpa heard him, and his grandpa turned and looked at him. And when he looked at him, Tim saw his grandpa the way he'd never seen him before, because his grandpa had forgotten to put in his dentures. And so he had this grin, but it was this odd grin that he got from him that he'd never seen. And now as he looked at this homeless man who had this odd grin and this unshaven face, he remembers his grandpa. And actually the smells of the bacon and the eggs kind of drift up. And he realizes, oh my goodness, it's my grandpa. He could be my grandpa. I could be his grandson. And he reached into his wallet and he took the money out, all the bills that he had, and he just put it right on that piece of cloth. And he reached out and he shook the man's hand. Said, thank you. This experience changed his life. It was a burning bush. The man wasn't the man, and yet he was the man, but he was his grandpa, but he was right here, but he was on a camping trip. But you see how bushes are burning down all over the place. We just have to keep our eyes open and our hearts. For hang-ups, holiness, of course, lead to humility. And humility is taking yourself, your story, out of the center. So your hang-ups, they just become minuscule. Who gives a rip, right? You can face them and just say, okay, I'm never going to be perfect. I get it. All right. Yes, I have a tough time with pets. Okay. I don't do well with money. Yes, I understand. I want to take care of my procrastination, but I just don't have the time to get around to it. You see, to take your story out of the center and realize that you're part of this much larger story. The story of the universe, the story of all humankind, the story of God at work in your heart and the hearts of others as well. Hang-ups, holiness, humility. Let's bring them all to the table and share this